again, Geoffrey, thank you very much for coming into the studio today to talk about your recent decision to throw your hat in the ring for the mayoral race in Framingham. We'll get into the specifics leading into November, leading into the campaign season, if you will, within a couple of months. But first, I wanted to take a step back for people who may not be aware of you and your work. Tell us a little bit about your background that's led you to this point.
Well, it traces back to when I was living in Newton, and my son was in elementary school. It's called primary school in Australia, where I'm from. And he couldn't do math very well, so I had to practice with him at math. And when he'd be wandering around the house, I'd ask him 6 plus 5, and etc. So I got him pretty good on that. But then I could see there was a weakness in the school system, and the school system, well-regarded school system, but weak on math. So I decided that I would try and lobby to improve math. That proved difficult from the outside. So I decided to run, and I ran twice there. The first time in 2005 I lost with 40% of the vote. The second time I ran on a full-blown math and science platform and got 60% of the vote. And I was the first person in 15 years to defeat an incumbent school committee member, and I had the entire council and school committee against me in that race. So I learned that if you go out to the community and tell them the facts and what you're about, that really works. So I was motivated there. When I came to Framingham in 2014, when my youngest son graduated and went off to college, I thought I wouldn't be involved in that anymore. But then I was looking at the school system, looking at some of the financials. They were shifting to a city. I had 6 years of experience on a school committee in a city, and so I decided I'd run for school committee here. And then I got off after 4 years because I realized that the school system was quite well administered with Bob Tremblay and Lincoln Lynch and so on, but all of the problems were city-side. And so I've been lobbying for the last 2 years with a column, the Framingham Observer, which is a Substack newsletter, trying to make change from the outside. And you can make some change, like they double their investment in road repair, but it's really, the problems are so systemic that you have to run and do it from the inside. And I'm convinced that with, Charlie Sisitsky's had 4 years and he's largely focused on projects. And his reason for running that he announced was, well, I like the job and I like to do projects. Well, that's the least of my concerns. These projects, I think you hire a project manager to do projects, but you need to focus on education, infrastructure, environment, protecting the workforce, better financial management. So all of probably the first 10 priorities that I have are not visible in Charlie's world. So I think I'm compelled to run. Framingham, I think, is degrading slowly, and either I leave or I stay and fight. And so I decided I would stay and fight.
How long have you been considering this decision to run?
I probably for the last year, because it started to dawn on me. I mean, it's not my natural inclination to go and try and be mayor, but my natural inclination is trying to make sure that everybody understands what the problems are. And I'm a teacher at heart. I started out in education as a physicist. I was a physics professor at BU. I like to teach people things. I like to see people improve. I like to see students maximize their potential. And really, that's what I'm about. If in this campaign I succeed in informing the public of what the problems are and what we should be doing about it, and nonetheless I lose, I will regard that as a success.
Now, obviously a big educational background as you just outlined, but you also mentioned that a lot of the things that you see that need to be changed within Framingham sort of are outside of the purview of Framingham Public Schools.
Yes.
With that in mind, over the last couple of years, has there been anything that you've learned in your government experience, whether it's in Newton or Framingham, that's sort of informed your stances elsewhere across the community, if that makes any sense?
Right. In fact, most of my time has been spent on things outside the school system because the school system's funding is threatened by the other problems in the city, in particular the infrastructure problems that we have. We have a $100 million backlog in road repair. We have $100 million in roof replacements to do. We have an estimated $200 million backlog in the water and sewer system. And so that infrastructure is sucking money out of the schools. We got a lot of Chapter 70 money in 22 and 23, I think it was, to go to help students who were less advantaged, low-income students, special needs students, English, not native English speakers, but about $15 million of that money that should have gone to students went to fixing roofs. So I think we have a very substantial structural financial problem here, both in the operating budget, in the capital investment budget, that threatens the schools. That's on the financial side. The other side is the MBTA situation, the zoning. And the mayor thinks he's achieved a major victory in getting approval of this old zoning plan.
Central business, yeah.
Right, from 2015. But what he's not doing the math of that properly, because as it stood before the MBTA communities law, that was completely under our control. We'd done that zoning. And you can typically build large apartment buildings that don't produce a lot of students. For example, if you look at the Buckley, it produces about 1 student for every 6 units. If you look at the ones that are already built, like the Green at 9 and 90, it's similar. And the reason is they have a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom units. The thing about the MBTA communities law is it focuses on families and apartments. And for a family with typically 2 kids per family, they're looking typically at 3 bedroom apartments. So when you say you've got by right zoning, the mayor said, oh, we've got it all set and we can have by right zoning and developers will build. They're going to build 3 bedroom apartments. Now, if you look at the national census on how many students are produced per apartment there, it's at least 2/3 of a student per apartment. And so if you build 4,500 students, which is what the number is, you're going to get about 2,700 students flooding the school system. Now, if we had control, we'd get 1 in 6, and that's more like 500-600 students. So we're going to face a big disaster here if that plan goes ahead. And the state has accepted it, but conditionally. And their condition is, as it will turn out, is that these be units in which you cannot say how many bedrooms. And so the developers will build 3 bedrooms. I'm actually a developer. I just redeveloped my old 3-family house in Brookline. Major issue was 3 bedrooms is the target, so you can get people. So we're really threatened by that. And everybody's saying, oh, well, this is really one. It's actually not. That thing's a Trojan horse. It looks good, but it's going to kill you. So I think the city council needs to proceed with its plan, which is largely what Leora Malak kind of published. And if they build on that and they make sure that they do a lot of what they call paper zoning, and that is you put that zoning where there's already
pre-existing areas, yeah.
Right, which is what Wayland did. It's what all the other places do. We'll produce some housing, and in the past we have. We've done a really good job of that. So you got to always do one thing: calculate how many students are going to be generated, because we'll kill our school system. And that, in this entire MBTA communities law process, has never been done. The mayor started it late, never made that a central focus, because my focus is education. And so therefore I say, look at the educational impact. That's a really big difference between the current mayor and me.
Right, so education-based, so you talk about the operating budget, Framingham Public Schools,
Yeah.
And their calculation for what they get out of the annual operating budget. We talk about the MBTA Communities Act, and like you had mentioned off camera, we could talk about this for hours, and I'm sure
Right.
as this campaign
Right.
continues, you, Mayor Sisitsky, will be talking with to learn more about where you stand on those issues
Right.
As we get closer to early November. But I was also curious, outside of those 2 facets, are there any other major issues that really compelled you to enter this race?
Yeah, there's environment. The mayor, in his campaign releases so far, has not mentioned the environment. And we should be having solar panels on every roof and canopies in every parking lot. As you'll see across the way here, there's a canopy going up at Framingham State. Why? Because they make money out of it, and because it helps the environment. Framingham currently is missing out on about $3 million a year in utility savings if we put solar on every school roof and every parking lot. And in Charlie's term, there's been no new projects of any kind that have been completed or fully funded. And that's a big, easy thing to do. We can just go ahead and do that. And so when students in Framingham High come out and say, does the community care about our future? Global warming is real, the fires are raging everywhere. They're going to see, if I am elected mayor, they will see a solar canopy go up there. So there's that. The other thing is landfills are filling up. So we've got to reduce the trash stream. 40% of the trash stream is compostable. And we've been trying for a year to get Charlie to approve curbside composting and bless a company, Black Earth Compost, to do it, and still nothing is done. And so that's another one. The other thing is workforce protection, where we've got 80 vacancies in the city side workforce, and our DPW workforce has been particularly depleted. So we got roads in really poor repair, not only for lack of funding, but because we don't have the crews anymore to man the repair operation. So there's all of those things that seem to be nowhere on the current mayor's radar. This is bread and butter, municipality stuff. We do the roads, the roofs, the schools, and the superintendent and his staff take care of the education, in which I have a very great interest also, because I think math should be much more prominent than it is. But the government itself doesn't use mathematics. It can't even project where we're going, and we're going in a very difficult direction right now with these backlogs building up. So I want to bring analytics to the government as well.
Now, you have been vocal about these local issues, not just here, but also, for example, your Substack, The Observer.
Yep.
And that has also featured critiques of local officials throughout these variety of topics. As mayor, how would you work with those officials down the line at the Memorial Building to make progress on these issues that you've identified?
Right. Well, the last election was very critical because Stefanini got defeated. And up until that point, the people who I regard as part of the old guard had a 6-5 majority on the council. Now it's the other way around. There's a 6-5, I think, in favor of progress. And so I think I would hope to hold that majority. And it would be critical in that regard that Stefanini doesn't come back in District 8 and defeat Leslie White Harvey. So that's important. But we have some good councillors. We got Adam Steiner and Brandon Ward and Leo Malak. And also I know Tracy Bryant very well and Novel Alexander. I think both Tracy has got a good independent opinion, and she's developing. I think Novel has been somewhat in the shadow of the King Cannon view of things, which in my view is not an investment approach in the city, but it's a cost-cutting approach. But I think he could develop. We're very good friends. He and I worked on the Fuller flyer campaign where we dropped 10,000 flyers. I ran that campaign and he and I did that. So I know the councillors pretty well, but we do need the council to perform better because they've produced almost no ordinances that I think are relevant. They should have ordinances requiring solar on every roof that is city-owned. You don't want to mandate for the community, although they're doing incredibly well. And you want to have a tree ordinance. So when people chop down a tree here, they need to put up another one there. And they have much stronger tree ordinances in Newton and Brookline. When I did the development in Brookline, we had to take down a tree, and you have to go and ask for permission, get the tree warden out, and make sure that can be done and replace it. So there's a lot of very simple, basic governmental stuff, and also knowing the law. I mean, it turns out that both the financial leadership and the mayor didn't understand Proposition 2.5. They, in the last budget cycle, they thought that meant that the tax levy could only go up at 2.5%. But what it means is the tax levy limit can only go up at 2.5%. And there's a history here. For 30 years, Framingham taxed to the levy limit, 2.5% every year. And then 2013, when George King came back to town meeting, they started taxing below the levy limit. So the levy limit kept on going up, and the levy kept on dropping below it. The levy limit's now 250 million. We're at 210 million, something like that. So we lost about 40 million in revenue over the last decade, which is a huge revenue loss. And what it is, people say, well, we cut taxes is really good. But what we did is we didn't keep pace with inflation. And this is a big thing. People have told me not to talk about taxes because that's a really third rail of Framingham politics. But you have to have property taxes, that revenue stream, keeping pace with inflation. Otherwise, what happens? Well, your workforce has got labor agreements and they keep pace with inflation. So if you don't, you've got less money, so you start laying off the workforce. And that's what's been happening. And so that's a very important thing. You know, your federal taxes and your state taxes keep pace with inflation. Of course, your salaries go up. And you're in that bracket, such a percentage. But here we don't. So I think one of the very important things that we have to do, and we've done in the last couple of years actually since Louise Miller became CFO and then she was thrown out after 2 years, we got it more towards where inflation is. So my mandate would be, we want to fix all the problems in the city and not consider just cost, but value. So we've got to do these things really well, and if we don't do something, they're going to become more and more and more expensive. So there's a financial thing here, and we need to deal with that.
Jeff, what are the next steps for you here as you begin this journey towards November?
Okay, well, I have some campaign strategies. I have run at-large campaigns before because in Newton, school committee is an at-large position, even though you run from a district. So I know the logistics. I ran the Fuller campaign. We got 86% yes vote on the Fuller debt exclusion. One of the reasons was I produced a flyer, got it okayed by the central organizing committee, and then I organized a team of 20 people to drop 10,000 flyers over Framingham. And so I'm a flyer guy. When I came here, and when I ran for school committee here, no one knew me. Well, I never made a phone call, and then I never knocked on a door. I did go to the debates and this and that, but I walked my district, and I dropped a flyer at every door. And I made sure that people knew what I was about, what my experience was, what I brought to the table, and what the issues were. And that's my plan here, is I'm not going to go around seeking endorsements from people. I'm not going to go around and say, well, please vote for me. I'm going to say, here's what I know about where we are. And here's the story of what we need. And that's what I intend to do. And if you think that's a good thing, you can vote for me. But I'm not going to have what I would call a traditional campaign. It's rather like an insurgent campaign. I'm up against an incumbent who's got very good name recognition. But I bring innovation and experience and a bit of mathematics and analytics and also a sense of humor to this whole thing. We're very drab here. People are very serious, or they spend a lot of time talking about nothing. The city council does a lot of proclamations, but if you look at their agenda, they never get any reports on the roads and the roofs and the water and sewer system. I haven't seen one in the entire time that we've been a city. And so they're missing fundamental information. So if I make it to mayor, we're going to get quarterly reports on the state of all our infrastructure. And also we're going to come back on the schools, make sure they're properly funded. And I want to work with Bob, who I know very well, and unleash his creativity. He's very constrained and doesn't want to get involved in political battles. But I want to make math more prominent. I would like to get for a first robotics team at Keefe Tech. They're experts at electrical and plumbing and all that kind of stuff. And we need to expand Keefe Tech. We have 300 students on the waiting list for Keefe Tech. And if you look at the last election, one of the big deals is people will say, well, that hinged on the price of eggs and cost of living and that. But the most important thing was, why was that? There's a lot of people with a high school education who find it hard to get jobs and find it hard to make ends meet. And they're often people who will do well in the technical trades, who will do well repairing roads and all these things. They're very worthwhile jobs. Some of the best things I've seen are a well-constructed stone wall or a good plastering job. We don't appreciate those. And Keefe Tech is a place where kids who want to go and do those things, which are incredibly worthwhile, it needs to be expanded. So, I've been involved in this. I was in rental real estate manager for 40 years. And I was on the roof of I had multifamilies, half a dozen of them in Newton and Brookline. I was on the roof of every one. I learned how to repair concrete steps. I sanded floors. I painted. You know, I did minor electrical and plumbing because you really need to be certified for that. But I did all the landscaping at my house. I've planted dozens of trees and shrubs, and I have a cooking channel even on YouTube. You know, I'm engaged in life, and I love to see people thrive, and that's what I'm about.
Well, again, as this campaign continues, as we move into the summer and the early fall, we'll be sure to keep in touch throughout this process, Jeff. But for now, thanks for coming into the studio today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's really fun. I would love to come and chat more when you have more time for that later.